Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a question that, well, it feels ancient, but also incredibly current. How exactly does knowing ourselves connect to living a good, ethical life?
It really does feel foundational, doesn't it? Know thyself. It's almost the starting point for so much Western philosophy, especially virtue ethics, the idea that self-reflection is key.
Right.
But in today's world, with everything we're learning about biases and, the unconscious, you have to ask, is that old truism actually solid?
Yeah, that's exactly what we want to unpack today. Our mission isn't just to say, oh, self-knowledge is helpful. We want to get into the why. Why is it maybe essential for being a rational person, for being virtuous? And to do that, we need to move beyond just looking inside. We need some clearer categories, different kinds of self-knowledge.
Absolutely. That's crucial for this deep dive. We'll need to be clear on, mainly two big distinctions. First, knowing yourself like an outsider versus knowing yourself from the inside, that's third personal versus first personal.
Okay.
And then, even within that inside view, there's another split that's really important for ethics. Knowing something about yourself and endorsing it versus just knowing it's there, even if it feels alien. So endorsed versus merely expressive.
Got it. Those sound like important tools, but okay, before we build that up, let's face the challenge, because honestly, there's a lot of pushback, isn't there? From science, from philosophy itself, saying this whole self-knowledge thing is maybe flawed or even unhelpful.
Oh, definitely. The challenge is serious. And it comes from a couple of directions. So the first attack, you could say, is empirical. It comes from social psychology, cognitive science. A lot of research suggesting that knowing ourselves accurately isn't easy, maybe isn't even possible sometimes.
Right.
And worse, maybe trying too hard is actually counterproductive. It doesn't help us flourish.
I think I know what you mean, like that depressive realism idea, where people who are mildly depressed actually see themselves and maybe the world more accurately.
That's a classic example, yeah. The finding, or the suggestion at least, is that non-depressed people often operate with these positive illusions. We tend to overestimate our skills, our control.
Our chances of things working out.
Exactly. And if that's true, if the most realistic people are the less functional, maybe less happy ones, well, that really makes you wonder about the value of stark self-knowledge. Maybe a bit of self-deception is actually healthy. Necessary, even.
It paints the pursuit of self-knowledge as almost a luxury problem, something that could get in the way of just getting on with life. And then there's all the stuff about unconscious processes, right? Priming implicit bias.
Oh, absolutely. Decades of research showing how much of our behavior seems to run on autopilot, triggered by things we're not even aware of.
So if our actions are driven by these hidden scripts, these automatic associations, what's the point of conscious self-reflection? It feels a bit futile, like trying to steer a train by shouting at it.
Right. It seems like our conscious mind is just playing catch-up, maybe inventing reasons after the fact for why we did something.
Which connects to the philosophical challenge too, doesn't it? This idea that maybe virtue doesn't require all that high-level self-awareness.
Precisely. This comes from within the virtue tradition itself. Thinkers like Iris Murdoch, for instance. She worried that focusing too much on self-knowledge makes virtue sound overly intellectual.
Like you have to be a philosopher to be good.
Kind of, yeah. It seems to leave out people who are just, fundamentally decent, kind, unselfish, but maybe not very introspective, not good at knowing themselves, as Murdoch put it.
So the goodness is in the action, in the character, even if the person can't, articulate the complex reasons or self-analyze perfectly.
Exactly. And this gets really sharp with Nomi Arpali's idea of ignorant virtue, sometimes called inadvertent virtue. The go-to example here is Huck Finn.
Ah, yes. Let's walk through that again because it's such a powerful case. Huck lives in a society. He's absorbed its values. He consciously believes that helping Jim, the escaped slave, is wrong, a sin even.
His explicit conscious judgment is thoroughly racist, reflecting his upbringing. No question about that.
But his actions don't follow that judgment. He helps Jim anyway. Why?
Because of these deeper feelings. His sympathy for Jim as a person, their friendship, his recognition of Jim's humanity.
Yeah.
These motives are, fundamentally non-racist. And he acts on those motives.
Even though he thinks he's doing something terrible by acting on them.
Right. He acts virtuously, in effect, despite his conscious beliefs, and even condemns himself for it.
Okay, so playing devil's advocate here. Why isn't that enough? He does the right thing. The outcome is moral. The underlying feeling, even if unconscious, seems good, is demanding knowing virtue, just adding an unnecessary intellectual layer. Are we just being snobby about it?
That's the core question. And the answer, I think, hinges on shifting focus from just the outcome to the nature of rational agency. The critique isn't really about whether Huck's action was good. It's about whether his goodness is stable, principled, unified.
Okay.
And to get at that, we need to clarify what kinds of mental states we're talking about. We need the concept of judgment-sensitive mental states, or JSMS.
Right, JSMS. Break that down for us. What makes a mental state judgment sensitive?
Okay, so a JSMS is basically any mental state that can and, crucially, should respond to your own reasoning, your judgment about whether it's justified or good or true.
So, like beliefs, if I judge that my belief is based on bad evidence, I should be able to change it.
Exactly. Beliefs are a prime example. Intentions, too. If I decide my intention to, say, skip work is a bad idea, I should be able to revise that intention. Many emotions, especially valuative ones, like fearing something because you judge it to be dangerous or desiring something because you judge it to be good, those are also JSMS.
So they're tied to our reasons.
They are, or at least they ought to be. We contrast these with states that aren't sensitive to judgment, like a sudden reflex or a purely physiological response, or maybe those aliefs, that gut feeling of fear on a high balcony, even when you know the railing is perfectly safe. Your rational judgment doesn't automatically switch off the feeling.
I see. The feeling doesn't respond to the knowing better.
Right. And the philosophical point here is that genuine virtue, the kind that's reliable and principled, needs to flow from motives that are JSMS. They have to be connected to and potentially changeable by the agent's overall rational view of things.
Okay, so connecting this back to Huck Finn, the argument is that his unconscious sympathy, well, good in that instance, isn't properly judgment sensitive, and that makes his virtue unreliable.
That's the crux of it.
Yeah.
And there's actually empirical backing for why these unconscious or unarticulated states are inherently less rational, less stable.
How so? What's less rational about unconscious thought?
Well, several things. First, unconscious processes tend to be heavily associative. They link ideas based on, things happening together in time or looking similar or having a similar emotional feel.
Rather than logical connections, like A, therefore B. It's more A reminds me of B.
Exactly. It's less about grounding reasons and more about connections, similarities. This makes it less capable of handling complexity, particularly logical structure. For instance, unconscious thought often struggles with negation, the concept of not.
Really? How does that work?
It's hard for these associative processes to represent complex syntax, like, it is not the case that P. So if Huck's non-racist feelings remain unconscious, unarticulated, they probably lack the structure needed for a truly principled commitment, like the abstract idea. Slavery is wrong because no human being should be treated as property. His feeling for Jim is powerful, but it might be quite specific, quite local.
So if he met another escaped slave, someone less like Jim, maybe someone he didn't have that personal connection with, his unconscious sympathy might not kick in.
That's the danger.
And his conscious racist beliefs might take over instead.
Precisely. That's the unreliability problem. Unconscious motives are often very tied to the here and now, to immediate stimuli. They lack the capacity to guide action based on general principles or long-term goals that require conscious thought and planning.
So if Huck can't bring that non-racist sentiment into his conscious deliberation, if he can't reflect on it, endorse it, generalize it, then his virtue remains sort of accidental, prone to breaking down.
Exactly. It's vulnerable. He can be overridden by his conscious but wrong beliefs, especially under pressure. So, self-knowledge, the process of making these judgment-sensitive states conscious, bringing them into the light of reason that seems necessary to transform mere sympathetic reaction into a stable, unified, ethical character.
Okay, so virtue needs that rational unity, and self-knowledge is the key to achieving it. That sets the stage nicely for digging into what that self-knowledge actually looks like.
Right. We need to get more specific about how we know these states.
Yeah.
So we established that some kind of self-knowledge is crucial. Now let's unpack the different ways we can know our own minds. The first big cut is between third-personal and first-personal self-knowledge.
Okay, third personal. That sounds like knowing yourself the way someone else might know you, from the outside.
That's a great way to put it. It's knowledge you get through evidence that's, in principle, available to others. You infer it from your behavior. Maybe someone tells you something about yourself. You read your old journals.
Like noticing, I always get quiet when that topic comes up. I must be uncomfortable with it.
Exactly. You're drawing an inference. It produces what philosophers call a witness report. You're reporting a fact about this person who happens to be you based on evidence. There's a kind of distance there. It can feel alienated.
Right. Versus first personal self-knowledge. This is the more classic idea of introspection.
Yeah.
Looking inward.
It's often linked to introspection, yeah,
Yeah.
but it's perhaps more specific than just looking. It's about a kind of immediate access. The core idea is that you have a unique capacity to self-describe a mental state, let's call it M, in a way that you're saying I have M isn't just a report about M, it's also an expression of M itself.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If I genuinely say, I feel happy right now, I'm not just describing a psychological fact I discovered through inference. By saying it expresses the happiness. Or if I say, I intend to go to the store, that statement itself is part of enacting the intention. It carries a special kind of authority.
Okay, that makes sense. But this is exactly where the skeptics jump in again, right? People like Timothy Wilson arguing that this first-person inner look is actually really unreliable.
Absolutely. Wilson's work is built on studies that seem to show just that. The famous pantyhose experiment, for instance.
Remind us of that one.
Okay, so people were shown 4 identical pairs of stockings laid out on a table and asked which they preferred. There was a strong position effect. They overwhelmingly preferred the pair on the far right.
Just because of where it was.
Seems so. But when asked why they preferred it, nobody mentioned the position. They invented reasons. This one feels sheerer, the knit is better, the color seems richer, even though all the stockings were identical.
So Wilson's conclusion is, we're just making stuff up, confabulating reasons for preferences we don't actually understand.
That's the interpretation. Our first-person reports about why we feel or choose something might be unreliable stories we tell ourselves. Or think about implicit association tests.
Yeah, the IATs, showing that people who sincerely say they believe in equality might still have faster, more automatic negative associations with certain groups.
Right. Suggesting a disconnect between our explicit first-person expressed beliefs and maybe deeper, less conscious attitudes or biases.
So these are powerful challenges to the reliability of that first-person authority.
They are, but it's important not to overstate the case. The counterargument is that these experiments often focus on, well, quite specific situations, sometimes contrived ones like identical stockings or states that are peripheral or maybe even pathological to some degree, or they measure things like reaction time, which isn't the same as a consciously considered judgment.
So the fact that introspection fails in these specific cases doesn't necessarily mean it's useless for, say, knowing if I'm feeling sad right now or if I intend to keep a promise.
Exactly. It doesn't prove that third-personal inferential knowledge is always better or more reliable for all types of mental states. External observation is great for spotting patterns, maybe inconsistencies, but it often misses the internal meaning, the intention behind an action.
An observer might see me get up and walk towards the kitchen and infer I want coffee, because I usually do, but only I have that direct first-person access to my actual intention, which might be to get water this time.
Precisely. So while acknowledging the limits, we probably still need that first-person perspective. And this brings us to the second crucial distinction, the one that operates within first-personal knowledge. This is really key for ethical development.
Okay, so within that, from the inside view, there's another important difference.
Yes. It's the difference between endorsed and merely expressive first-personal self-knowledge.
Endorsed versus merely expressive. What's the difference there?
Okay, think of endorsed first-personal self-knowledge as the ideal, the goal. This is where you can not only express your mental state, M, I believe P, or I desire X, but you can also express your endorsement of it. You stand behind it rationally.
Meaning the state aligns with your judgment. It feels like yours in a deep way.
Exactly. It's effectively judgment sensitive. It responds, or is open to responding, to your assessment of whether it's true or good or justified. This represents a kind of psychological integration, a unified self.
Okay, that sounds like the aim. What's the alternative then? Merely expressive.
Merely expressive first-personal self-knowledge is when you can still access and articulate the mental state first. Personally, you know you feel it.
Yeah.
You can say, I feel intensely angry, or I have this irrational fear. But you can't endorse it.
And it doesn't align with your considered judgment.
Right. It feels alien or recalcitrant. It resists your rational assessment. You know it's there, you can express it, but you can't stand behind it as flowing from your own rational agency. It represents an internal conflict, a division within the self.
Ah, I see. So you can know it's happening in you, but it doesn't feel like it's fully of you in a rational sense.
That's a good way to put it. And understanding this difference is absolutely vital when we think about how ethical change actually happens.
Okay, let's dive deeper into this idea of endorsed knowledge. You called it the ideal. Philosophers like Richard Moran talk about transparency here. What does that mean, achieving transparency about our own minds?
Transparency is about the stance you take when you're trying to figure out what you believe or desire. To know your belief, P, with endorsement, with transparency, you don't look inward at your psychological state. You don't introspectively scan for belief feelings.
So what do?
You look outward, at the world, at the reasons for P. You could adopt what Moran calls a deliberative stance.
Okay, so if someone asks me, do you believe it's going to rain? A transparent, endorsed answer wouldn't involve me saying, well, I notice I'm feeling anxious about my picnic, so I must believe it's going to rain.
Exactly. That would be treating your belief like an internal object you discovered. That's more like a witness report about your psychology.
So the transparent answer would be?
You'd look at the sky, check the weather forecast, consider the evidence, and based on that, you'd answer, yes, I believe it's going to rain, or no, I don't. Your focus is on the world that makes the belief true or false, not on the inner state of believing itself.
Right. You answer the question about your belief by answering the question about the world.
Precisely. And this difference in stance, looking outward versus inward, has huge implications for accountability.
How so?
Well, when you offer an endorsed report, I believe P arrived at transparently. You make yourself accountable for the content of P. People can ask you why you believe it, expect you to provide reasons, evidence for P's truth. And crucially, you're implicitly committed to changing your belief if the evidence changes.
You're standing behind the belief's connection to reality.
Yes. But if you only offer a witness report, my therapist says I have a subconscious belief that P, or based on my behavior, it seems I believe P, you're only really accountable for the accuracy of that report about your psychology.
You don't have to defend P itself.
Not necessarily. You just have to defend the claim that you have the belief, perhaps as a psychological symptom or observation. The focus shifts from the truth of P to the fact of your having the state. It's a subtle but critical difference.
And this is why just having third personal knowledge isn't enough for, say, ethical deliberation or having a real conversation about reason.
Absolutely. This becomes really clear with the thought experiment. Let's imagine someone, let's call her Chloe, who has this amazing inner self-detector app. It gives her flawless third personal knowledge of all her mental states.
Okay, a perfect internal witness via technology.
Right. So her fiancé, Mark, asks, Chloe, do you truly want to marry me? Chloe consults her app. The app reads, high probability indication of desire to marry Mark detected in subject Chloe. So Chloe reports the app indicates I desire to marry Mark.
She has accurate third personal knowledge, but something feels off.
Something's very off. Because even in the act of trusting and reporting the app's reading, Chloe is doing something first personal. She acquires a new first personal belief. I believe the app is accurate about my desire.
Ah, so there's a higher order belief that's inevitably first personal and presumably endorsed. She trusts the app.
Exactly. You can't escape endorsed first personal commitments somewhere in the chain of being a rational agent who speaks and acts. Endorsement is pervasive. But imagine if Chloe could only make witness reports about the desire itself.
What happens then?
Well, imagine Mark tries to reason with her. Chloe, think about it. We have such different values. My job is unstable. Are you sure this is a good idea? If Chloe can only reply, Mark, I don't know why. The app just says the desire is there. It's a fact about me, like having brown hair.
The conversation breaks down. Her desire isn't something she can reason about or take responsibility for in the same way. It's like a weather condition inside her.
Precisely. It's treated as an alien force. You can't rationally persuade a headache to leave, and Mark can't rationally engage Chloe about the merits of a desire she treats as just an external fact provided by her app.
So without the possibility of endorsed self-knowledge, rational dialogue, persuasion, and joint deliberation about our commitments become impossible.
That's the point. Third personal knowledge, however accurate, is insufficient for the kind of agency needed for relationships, ethical commitments, and a flourishing life. We need to be able to stand behind our states, connect them to reasons, and be open to changing them through deliberation.
And this capacity for endorsed knowledge, this transparency, is what creates that internal unity you mentioned earlier.
Yes. It ensures our judgment-sensitive states are, ideally, lined up with our considered judgments, our values, our long-term principles. Without it, we're pulled around by impulses, associations, here-and-now reactions, the less rational stuff. Endorsed knowledge allows reason to mediate conflicts, to strive for coherence.
It integrates the self.
It integrates the reasoner, the speaker, and the actor. And this gives us a way to think about mental health not just descriptively, what states people happen to be in, but normatively.
Meaning there's an ideal we should strive for.
Exactly. The framework suggests that aiming for judgment responsiveness for states that can be known with endorsement is a core part of what it means to be mentally healthy. It sets a standard. So even if depressive realism is true descriptively for some people, the normative ideal isn't resigned accuracy combined with dysfunction.
The ideal is accurate judgment and mental states that align with that judgment, a kind of rational integration.
Yes. It posits the unified rational life where our feelings and commitments make sense to us and respond to our best judgment is the standard we should aim for, even acknowledging how difficult that is in practice.
Which leads us perfectly into the messy reality part. What happens when our states don't respond to judgment?
Right. So endorsed knowledge, transparency, that's the ideal. The picture of a well-integrated rational agent, which Moran emphasizes. But we all know the reality is often messier. We have feelings, fears, desires that just don't listen to reason. Recalcitrant mental states.
Like, I know rationally that public speaking isn't life-threatening, but the fear can still be overwhelming. My judgment doesn't just switch it off.
Exactly. Or holding on to anger towards someone long after you've consciously decided to forgive them. These states resist transparency. They resist alignment with judgment. Moran's framework tells us what the goal is, alignment, but it doesn't fully capture the process of dealing with states that are currently misaligned.
So we need something else to understand that process.
Yes, and this is where insights from therapy, particularly psychoanalysis, become really valuable. Thinkers like Jonathan Lear highlight the crucial role of that other kind of first-person knowledge, merely expressive self-knowledge.
The kind where you know the feeling is there, you can articulate it, but you can't endorse it.
Precisely. Lear points out that, in therapy, getting patients to simply give voice to these powerful, often irrational, repressed feelings and impulses, first personally, is often the essential first step.
Even if the feelings seem bad or don't make rational sense.
Especially then. Freud himself saw this. The therapeutic process often requires the patient to consciously own these difficult states. Yes, I feel this seemingly irrational rage, or I have this fantasy. Not necessarily to endorse them as good, but simply to acknowledge their presence from the inside. Merely expressing them is progress, bringing them into conscious awareness.
Okay, but why? How does just saying, I feel X, even though it's irrational, actually help move towards the ideal of endorsed rational states? It feels like just admitting defeat sometimes.
That's a fair question. It's not about admitting defeat, but about using merely expressive knowledge as an instrument, a necessary tool on the path towards potential integration, or at least better management. It acts as a bridge.
A bridge? How?
Well, think about it in terms of overcoming two kinds of problems: emotional blocks and cognitive impasses.
Okay. Emotional blocks first.
Right. Sometimes, to actually change a deep-seated emotional state, you first have to fully experience it.
Mm-hmm.
If you immediately try to clamp down on it with rational judgment, stop feeling angry, it's illogical, you might just suppress it. It goes underground, festers, but doesn't change.
So expressing it, even just acknowledging, wow, I feel really angry right now, allows the emotion to actually be there, to be processed.
Exactly. You have to allow the feeling its space, articulate its contours, feel its weight before you can begin to understand its roots, and maybe gradually bring your rational judgment to bear on it in a way that actually transforms it, rather than just silencing it temporarily. It needs to become pliable first.
Okay, that makes sense for emotions. What about the cognitive impasse?
This relates to the structure of thought. Often, these conflicting states, anxieties, resentments, weird desires, exist initially as vague, inchoate feelings or intuitions. They're powerful, but they lack clear definition.
They're hard to pin down.
Right. And because they're fuzzy and unarticulated, it's very hard for your rational mind to even engage with them. You can't really argue with a vague unease.
So what does merely expressive knowledge do here?
By putting the feeling into words, I think I resent my boss because, or this specific situation makes me feel insecure in this particular way. You start to give it structure. You flesh it out.
You make it more concrete.
Yes. And once it's more concrete articulated, it becomes something your rational judging capacity can actually see, examine, and engage with.
Right.
It moves from being this murky background noise to being a participant, albeit perhaps an unwelcome one, in your internal conversation.
Ah, I see. So articulating the irrational state makes it available to the rational process.
Exactly. It brings it into the space of reasons, even if its own reasons are initially bad ones.
This sounds like it maps out a kind of journey for ethical development then, using these different kinds of knowledge.
I think it does. You can see a typical progression. Often it might start with their personal knowledge, maybe feedback from others, or noticing a pattern in your behavior. People keep saying, I seem defensive about X. Maybe there's something there. That identifies a potential conflict.
Okay, the clue from the outside.
Then comes the crucial, often difficult step of merely expressive knowledge, turning inward and trying to articulate that defensiveness, that insecurity, that anger from the first-person perspective. Yes, I do feel defensive when X comes up. It feels like this. I know it might not be justified, but I feel it.
Bringing it into conscious awareness, giving it voice.
Right, making it an object for your own conscious mind. And then gradually, hopefully, through reflection, understanding, maybe therapy, maybe just life experience, you work towards endorsed knowledge. The state might transform, becoming genuinely responsive to your judgment. Okay, I understand why I felt defensive, but I now see it's not warranted, and the feeling itself starts to align with that new understanding.
So the defensiveness might lessen or change or be integrated into a more rational view.
Exactly. The division starts to heal. The person becomes more unified. And notice, the process itself builds virtue.
How so?
Well, facing uncomfortable truths about yourself, articulating difficult feelings, wrestling with internal conflict. It takes courage, honesty, patience, critical thinking. The very act of engaging in this self-knowledge journey, using merely expressive knowledge as a tool towards endorsement, requires and develops the virtues needed to live that more integrated ethical life. The transformation isn't accidental, it's earned.
The process shapes the person.
Precisely. The means contribute to the end. #tag outro.
Wow, okay, that really brings it all together. We started with that simple idea, know thyself leads to virtue, but the journey we've taken shows it's much more complex and dynamic than that.
It really is. It's not about passive navel-gazing or just finding facts about yourself. It's an active process, deeply tied to our capacity for rational thought, for taking responsibility for our inner lives.
So the key takeaway seems to be that genuine virtue isn't about ignorance, however well-meaning, like Huck Finn initially. It requires striving for that rational agency.
Yes, and that striving involves mastering, or at least working with, these different forms of self-knowledge. We need the normative ideal that's the goal of endorsed self-knowledge, where our states align with our best judgment, creating unity and enabling reliable virtue.
But we also absolutely need the instrumental tool that's merely expressive self-knowledge to actually deal with the messy, conflicted, recalcitrant parts of ourselves, to bring them into the conversation so they can eventually be addressed by reason.
You need both. The ideal sets the direction. The tool helps you navigate the difficult terrain to get there.
And the value isn't just that you end up making better choices, it's that the person who emerges from that process is more unified, more rationally coherent, and the ethical life they lead feels genuinely theirs. It's authored, not accidental.
Exactly. It's about the quality of agency, the integrity of the self. That's the deeper ethical significance.
Okay. So thinking about this pursuit of rational unity and endorsed knowledge, it leaves me with a final thought, maybe a bit of attention. What about the parts of life where maybe full rational endorsement isn't the point or even possible?
What do you mean?
Well, think about things like falling in love, or being deeply moved by a piece of art, or choosing a vocation that just feels right, even if you can't fully articulate why in neat, rational terms. These often involve profound subjective experiences, maybe non-rational intuitions or commitments.
That's true.
So the question is, if we relentlessly pursue transparency and rational endorsement for all our important states, could that sometimes be counterproductive? Could forcing rationality onto these deeply subjective, perhaps necessarily opaque areas of life actually distort them, or even destroy the very value we find in them? Is there maybe an ethical danger in demanding transparency everywhere?
That is a fascinating and difficult question. Does the quest for total rational unity sometimes miss the value of mystery or intuition or states that resist full articulation? Something definitely for you, the listener, to chew on.